Good morning, everyone, esteemed guests, business leaders, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. We sincerely appreciate you honoring this invitation to be part of this workshop. Today's session promises to be both insightful and enriching as we discuss how great leaders transform their organizations and shape the future. My name is Olusegun Zaccheaus, and I'm a partner and the lead of strategy and in West Africa, and I'll be your host for today. You're all welcome. We know a few people are still joining, but I think we'll just kickstart this very quickly. If we move quickly to our agenda for today, what we'll be covering, really we'll have a couple of context provided by Uyi, our national senior country managing partner. We'll have Peter Gassman, who is the lead of strategy within PwC Network, and Peter Crawford, the lead of strategy in Africa, share a few thoughts. And then we go quickly into the main conversation of the day, in which Matt will share a few thoughts on how great leaders transform the organizations and shape the future. After that, we'll go quickly into a panel discussion, in which we're going to have Matt. We'll have Vish, who is the head of advisory for PwC within West Africa. We'll have Abubakar Sulaiman, who is the CEO of Sterling Bank, and Femi Lawal, who leads digital transformation within NLNG, be part of the panel. And after we go through the panel and have conversation, we will also take your questions, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So this is, sort of speak, our outline for the day. But before we kickstart this, a little bit of housekeeping. The session is being recorded so that we can share this with participants that could not make it or who would like to refer to this session subsequent to this. If you notice your microphone has been muted, and this is supposed to help to reduce disruptions, as we go through the session. If you have questions, please feel free to, post them within the chat room, and there are colleagues who are there who will also help respond, and we'll take some of those questions as we even go through the panel session and have a Q&A session afterward, right? And having sort of gone through this housekeeping, I think it's time to kickstart the session. And I would like to invite Uyi, the country senior partner for PwC in Nigeria and the regional senior partner for PwC in West Africa, to start us off with an opening remark. Uyi.
Thank you very much, Sheku. Good morning, good afternoon, and in the odd chance, perhaps good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Thank you for this opportunity. I think I gladly accepted, because this is, I can say I was actually given the opportunity to lead a strategy session of key strategists or advisors. Welcome to this workshop on how great leaders transform their organizations and shape the future. Digital transformation has become this sort of strategy buzz phrase of the moment. But while we believe the world is going digital, digitization as a business strategy has become a road to equivalency. So for us, in this particular case, what we see, sorry, just a second, we've got some of our experts who are joining us today to talk about the digital transformation journey. You see, I should have gone beyond digital here, checking my digital notes, as it were. Not that digital initiatives alone are not enough to win in the marketplace. Companies need to reimagine the compelling value they will offer and how they will create it in some kind of differentiating way. To help us really delve into and better appreciate this subject, we have invited two of our well-renowned strategists who are also our strategy and partners to share with us on how leaders can define a bolder purpose to share and transform their organizations. Paul, welcome, Paul Lingwald and Matt Mani. You will be listening to them shortly. They've co-authored this book, Beyond Digital, in which they will explain that the future will belong to companies that successfully answer two fundamental questions for us. What unique value do we contribute to in today's world? And what capabilities indeed allow us to create that value better than anyone else? Let me also seize this opportunity to introduce you to our West Africa strategy business led by strategy and business led by Segun Zaccheaus, who is our host today. Apart from Segun, as you all know, Strategy and is our global consulting, strategy consulting business, and the only at-scale strategy business inside a professional services network. With this new practice in West Africa, we're able to combine our strategic foresight with the experience of our frontline teams across PwC to just transform perspectives, pragmatism and ambition into actions, those helping some of our clients or most of our clients to drive those results that ensure sustainable outcomes. On this note, I really want to thank Peter, our global strategy and leader. He's in the UAE currently, very important client engagement, but decided to join us because of the importance of these events, and as well as our South African, our African lead, Peter Crawford, who has also joined us today. You will be learning more about these. And it's also my pleasure and privilege to invite welcome our distinguished panelists. So on that note, let me step back from my real big moments of fame in leading this session, and please really enjoy the best from the real experts, as it were. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee, for providing us a good context. And I like the joke around going beyond digital. And without much ado, let me invite Peter Gassman. Peter Gassman is a global leader of strategy and his base is in Germany, though he's currently in UAE doing the good work of strategy and please join me in welcoming Peter Gassman to give us a bit of context on strategy and globally.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Louis, for this really important moment. And I have to say, I'm also quite excited about this. And you see the global connectivity a warm welcome from my side. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody. Shogun was saying I'm based in Germany. Actually, I used to say I'm based in airports. So we actually connect the world quite intensely. And I'm really proud that we now have West Africa on the list as well, so that we can bring the expertise to the country, but also that we bring the country into the mix and also can learn from West Africa and Africa. I'm connected to Peter Crawford for quite some time. So I think this is actually a really great development. Let me give you a really short overview before we get into Peter's talk and then into the discussion with Matt, what Strategy and is. First of all, we are actually quite a few people, roughly 3,000 plus staff in 40 plus countries. So we are almost everywhere. And in particular with the combination with PwC, I think this is a unique proposition that we can bring in all the expertise for your enterprise wherever you need it. We have more than 400 dedicated partners to strategy work and strategy and we are growing. So the plus is not just in kind of showing that we are more than 400 currently, but we are really on a growth path, not just adding new territories now like Nigeria and West Africa, but also we are adding new topics. We get into the very fundamental transformational topics like digital. You will hear more about this, but also other areas. Deals is a very important topic, and of course, sustainability, ESG, and other very important topics. If you go to the next page, what do we bring with us? We have a very long history. Actually, combined, I think we are the consultancy with the longest history on earth. Some say we actually invented it, but I know there are others who also claim this. But I think we are right, and we have that reputation of a practical strategist. What does it mean for you? We used to say we don't work for clients, we work with clients. And we have a unique culture that enables us to bring with you the transformation that is needed. And I'm sure Matt in his talk Beyond Digital will show the importance of the actual transformation. I told you that we have a global footprint. We collaborate really seamlessly. It's not that we have to make this up. It's just easy to get on the call, get on the phone, bring in other capabilities, partners as needed. What is important to us is what matters to you. So the real value that is to your enterprise. We are not happy if we do a PowerPoint slide pack that ends up in a drawer. We are happy if you see the real value of what we bring to the table. And we are prepared to measure ourselves against that. We have leading ideas, foresight, we discuss a lot with the C-suite. And in those discussions, we develop our thinking further as well. So this is really necessary to help organizations with this really volatile and very difficult times. And then, of course, which is also very important for us, but I think also for you, we have unique opportunities to grow. So we recruit the best talent and we bring the best talent wherever they are to the opportunity and to the right problems. So I think that's our difference, that we actually also focus on the strategy through execution model. That's something, again, where PwC and us roughly now more than 9 years ago said, this is actually what we bring to the client. And with a combination of understanding the regulatory issues, tax issues, understanding deals, value creation topics, other topics that are really important in creating the strategy, and at the same time have access to those capacities in implementing the strategy, I think that's a very, very compelling offer and a very, very compelling value proposition. And you can see combined, we are, I think, a force second to none in terms of number of professionals, the offices that we cover, and also the countries we are in there. So we are very proud and very pleased that we can now bring this also in full swing, so to speak, to West Africa. And we really look forward to working with you in many instances. And let me maybe conclude with the last page and to quickly conclude this global introduction. The team structure is that we have a small global leadership team, and we are designing the future and the strategy for Strategy N, but we also connect globally, and with those team and the territorial leaders and the regional leaders that we bring in, we have a really good overview of what's happening globally and understand also the local specificities. So what we're saying, we think global, but we are really willing and able to act local. So I think that's a great combination, and the team here, we know each other quite well, and we operate quite seamlessly. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and I wish you all a great discussion, interesting insights. And I would conclude this, hand over to Peter to give you a bit more of the Western Africa specifics and Africa specifics. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. You're not alone. I think I've got my own digital challenges in that I can't see the screen, but given that it's my own slide, I should be able to talk to it. as Peter said, Strategy Ant, has been in existence for over 100 years. But as far as PwC Africa is concerned, it was launched in 2014 on the back of the Booz & Company acquisition by PwC. And in fact, as Peter mentioned, that is the first time that our paths have crossed. And I'm really proud to say that we've experienced strong growth over the last 8 years. We now I'm delighted, to have this moment, and credit to Uyi, Femi, and the West African leadership within PwC Africa to support ourselves in appointing my friend and colleague Shogun as the 7th partner in Strategy and for PwC in Africa. We now have over 70 strategy consultants, but for me, it's never been around, the number of people we have, the number of partners we have, but it's around the difference that we can make on our continent. And that's where that strapline at the top comes from. We've always said that, Strategy Ant's purpose, in line with the PwC purpose, is to champion economic and social change, and through kind of the sustainable transformation we deliver for our clients, but also across the continent. And just to pick up from what Peter said, I think what's a real differentiator for us are a number of things. We're based in Africa. Although I'm sitting in Cape Town at the moment, right at the southern tip of Africa, I've worked across the continent over the last few years as part of Strategy Ant, and helping to solve our clients' toughest problems, but with a seamless reach and connectivity with a global network. There's not kind of a day that's gone by that I'm not in touch with my Strategy Ant colleagues, across the globe, to bring the power of the network to solve our continent's unique, issues. Peter mentioned strategy through execution, and we look at it as strategies that work. And as a Strategy Ant partner, I'm really proud to be drawing on unrivaled PwC Africa network of over 10,000 people in the 32 countries that we represented across the East, the West, and the South market. And I had the privilege to work in your wonderful country, in Nigeria, towards the end of last year, at the start of this year, with my PwC colleagues, doing the corporate strategy of one of the large banks. And that was a true example of how we could use the strategy and practice based across, the African continent, which is now fully vested in West Africa through Shogun's appointment, using our global network, but also the power of kind of my PwC colleagues in Nigeria to not just develop the corporate strategy, but also the execution framework beyond that. And maybe my last 2 points, because we want to get into the heart of what today is about. For us, it's really important to be purpose-led, but results-oriented. And as Strategy Ant in Africa, we've set ourselves out to make sure that we solve key African challenges. And I've highlighted 3 there: financial inclusion, energy, and water. And maybe just 2 quick examples. Within South Africa at the moment, we're the strategic partners of the Rapid Payments Program, and the kind of official brand will be launched on Friday with the industry. But that is the program to digitize the payment rails in South Africa. And it's aimed at 2 things. It's aimed at, reducing cash in the system, which is, like at the last count, costing the country 0.5% of our GDP, but also financial inclusion, bringing the power of digital, as a way and means, to open, the financial services sector to those that need it most. And with that, you may have seen our recent publication that got launched last week on unlocking open banking across Africa, where we looked at very specific examples in South Africa, Kenya, as well as in Nigeria. Second one is energy. I'm sitting in a country where load shedding has gone up by 81% in this year compared to last year. And just this morning, we were engaging, in conversations with one of our clients around how you can act as an aggregator of renewable energy, to not just reduce, the reliance on, the coal-fired kind of energy sources in South Africa, but also really help our country, challenge and transform energy and solve the energy crisis. And lastly, kind of water. One of the key aspects that Strategy AND has been involved in, in South Africa, was to come up with, a very strong collaboration framework between the mines, the local communities, and the government, which enables the mine as a key provider of kind of employment in the area to get access to water, the communities, to have the water resources that they needed, and the government to use that, as a mechanism which we can replicate, across, various parts of the country, but also the continent. And that's why for me personally, but for us as Strategy AND, being purpose-led but results-oriented, working with kind of PwC, is critical within the context of our continent. And lastly, and this is the one sentence that's exactly the same as what Peter's presented, we recruit the best and the brightest, and I'm exceptionally proud of the team of strategy consultants that we've assembled across the continent. And sitting here as a very proud Strategy AND partner, I've welcomed Segun a number of times, but seeing that this is the formal launch of Strategy AND in West Africa, and to be part of the Strategy AND Africa and Global Network, and help us champion economic and social change across the continent. And with that, back to you, Segun.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the introduction and the context on Strategy and globally and in Africa. Without much ado, I think it's time to move into the meat and the conversation for today's workshop, which is a presentation on why our organization lead and transform and change the future. And driving the conversation, it's Matt Mani. Matt Mani is our strategy and partner and is a global leader of the transformation platform across PwC. He is a co-author of the Beyond Digital book, which I'm showing on my screen. I don't know if you can see it well. And this book was authored, was published by Harvard Business School, and they are already written an article also in the Harvard Business Review, right? And we also have Paul, who unfortunately could not make it because it's 3 a.m. in the United States where he's based. But I'm sure Matt will tell us a bit more of message from Paul. So I will invite Matt to take over the spotlight and share a few thoughts on Beyond Digital.
Thanks, Segun. Thanks for having me. First of all, congratulations for actually having a hard copy of the book. Well done there. So that is, I expect you have read it cover to cover, and it is the next time you can actually have this presentation without me at all, yeah? First, colleagues, thank you for allowing me to join you and have this opportunity today. As Segun mentioned, I had the privilege of working together with my co-author and partner, and also, after many arguments and fights, became my friend Paul Leinwand, on a 3.5-year journey of research and effort to shape the thinking and Beyond Digital, which I'm proud to say has been received very well by executives and others across the world, and sort of represents our thinking about what it actually takes to succeed as an organization today, and really as a leader and leadership team today. I think that's very important to emphasize. So as we've talked about, what I will attempt to do in the next few minutes is to share with you the core insights from the work, from the thinking. And then I would really encourage, even though we are online, it's of course in the last couple of years, I'm sure all of us have gotten accustomed to online engagement. So I would really encourage, if there are any questions or comments, please do include them in the chat function on Zoom. because of course the value in these discussions is in the dialogue in itself. So I can promise you, I certainly won't be offended by any challenges or interjections or questions you may want to ask. And I think that makes the discussion that much more lively and useful for everyone. So if you will please consider and accept my request, let me take you from there then to share a little bit with you about the Beyond Digital Thinking. First, before we talk about this topic around how do you shape the future, let me tell you a little bit about what drove Paul and I to spend 3.5 years of our lives doing the research on Beyond Digital, and I'll tell you a little bit about the way in which we did the research as well. Look, the underpinning of all of this started from the fact that we were hearing so much about so-called digital transformation. I'm sure many of you keep hearing that term. It's a much abused term, if you ask me personally. Often, unfortunately, used very much by colleagues in the consulting profession, who throw it around and sort of try to use it to make things sound a little bit sexier and brighter than they actually are. But when we started to really dig into it, and particularly as we had discussions with senior executives of institutions across the world, both in the private sector and public sector, what we heard time and time again was that despite the investments that they were making, and huge investments that they were making in technology programs and so-called digital transformation, digital programs, it wasn't really moving the needle forward in some significant way. Yes, perhaps they were able to get some efficiency benefit. Yes, maybe they were able to automate some processes, but they weren't actually seeing the promise of transformative impact. They weren't seeing the promise of suddenly, brand new business models and new revenue sources happening, or, fundamental competitive differentiation and really being able to put distance between themselves and their competitors. And this was a real struggle. And often we would hear executives talking about how much money, how much energy and effort they were putting into this, and yet they were struggling to actually really compete and really differentiate. Now, some of that, as we started to scratch into it to say, okay, well, my goodness, what does this mean? And why is this happening? Some of that is, of course, that while all of us are so busy digitizing and investing in all kinds of technology programs, well, so is the rest of the world. So are our competitors. It's not as though our competitors are sitting around doing nothing while we're digitizing. Everybody else is doing the same thing. So therefore, merely digitizing is just not good enough. It doesn't do anything. At best, it is table stakes just to keep pace with the rest of the market. And that then drove us to want to get underneath to say, well, my God, if that's the case, then what does it really take to succeed in the so-called digital age? How do you compete against these, all of these so-called startups that we hear about that we're supposed to be worried about, and these disruptive companies, whether they're in the fintech space or whether they're in the CPG space or in any industry? How do you actually compete against these so-called disruptive forces and actually create fundamental value, competitive advantage, and differentiation? And so that's what drove the inquiry, and then what led us then to really look at this and study this with some academic rigor. Now, just to tell you about, so how did we go about the study? So if we actually skip ahead 2 slides, if you don't mind, I want to tell you about some of the companies that we studied. If you go to the next slide, please. And so look, you'll see a number, 12 companies that we profiled and wrote about extensively in the book. However, beyond these 12, we started with actually a very broad global survey of thousands of companies. We asked executives all across the world for feedback on the companies they wanted to learn from in their industry sectors or in other industries. So the way we approached this was to say, instead of us cherry picking a handful of companies, because that's often what happens in these kinds of studies about, well, how do you succeed, is, either we consultants will go cherry pick some companies we know, or you see the same stories and sort of, if you will, hero worship of companies like the FANGs, Meta, Apple, Netflix, Google. Everybody wants to write about them and say, oh, all the amazing things these tech companies are doing. And rather than doing that, we really wanted to ask, well, who are the companies that executives want to learn from? Who do they admire? Who do they think has really found a way to compete successfully in their industry sector and find a way to differentiate and create a competitive distance? So we started with that kind of a broad global survey. We got a bunch of results back from that. We then looked at those companies and studied whether they had sustained performance. So first of all, had they transformed? Had their transformation been successful? Did they have sustained performance and results to show after that? We looked at trailing performance for a number of years to see, could we see that they actually had sustained results? It's not just a flash in the pan. And then lastly, we reached out to those companies. We interviewed and spent time with the leadership teams of about 35 different organizations, and then ultimately profiled in detail and wrote with their permission about the 12 companies you see here. And that was based on, again, spending time with the leadership team. Now, this was very important to us because it wasn't about just interviewing the CEO and hearing the good news story. It's really understanding the journey that these teams went through. And, really going through and being able to understand how they made decisions, and very importantly, actually learning from them the mistakes that they made. So as much as we talk about all of the insights and the good news story and what it takes to succeed, I think we learned a lot from the mistakes that they made along the way, which I'll share about as well. Last thing I want to say is if you look at these companies, you'll see these are companies from across different industries. They're not just tech companies like Microsoft and Adobe. They include companies like Hitachi or Komatsu, Inditex, which is the owner of the Zara brand, for those of you familiar with it, STC Pay, which is a fintech startup in Saudi Arabia, Titan, which is a large consumer goods company in India's Tata Group. So companies from across different industry sectors, certainly companies from different geographies of the world, and also in different ranging in revenue sizes. Microsoft, which is the world's latest $1 trillion valuation plus company on the one extreme, to STC Pay, which is $5 million in revenue. So, ranging in size, scale, etc. You will notice, however, most of these companies are what I would call established companies. So companies that perhaps came from a non-digital background and then really had to transform to compete. And that is by design, because really what we learned is that what organizations wanted to learn from is, how do you actually transform? It's very easy to say, well, we be a startup and start from scratch. But then if you have an established business, how do you transform? How do you succeed? And so that's the sort of the underpinning of the research that we did. Now I see there's a comment or a request here. Can we go back to the previous slide that talked a little bit about the context? And sure, why don't we do that? So if you don't mind just going back to the previous slide, it's a very busy slide. Let me just simply say that the simple message that you should take away here is that what we discovered through all of the research, and I'll go into it in more detail in a moment, is, well, first of all, we try to understand, well, is there anything different about the so-called digital age? And if so, what is different about it? And when we started to take a step back and look at it, what we saw is that, yes, there are three fundamental things that all of us have to contend with have shifted. And by the way, recent events around the world really demonstrate this in a much bigger and very tangible way. One is what we call the revolution of demand. Very, very fundamentally new ways almost every second for consumers like you and I to be able to express demand in very powerful ways, and also be able to express our voices about demand. Even, you can move things just through Twitter, or for those of you who follow football or soccer, as it's called, I think only in the United States, but for the rest of the world, we call it football. Cristiano Ronaldo moves a bottle of Coke, and then, my God, it takes billions of dollars off the valuation of one of the largest companies on the planet. So these little things, can have a big impact from a demand perspective. Certainly, if you think about now, similarly on the supply side, massive revolution in terms of the options that we have for supply, and also the reduction in barriers to competition, barriers to entry, not just from globalization, but frankly, what the technology is now making available. And then last but not least, I think very importantly, is the transformation of context. Not only on the one hand, the increasing globalization, and perhaps these days even now deglobalization that we see happening, the rules of the order shifting, but at the same time, ESG becoming so fundamental in how you think about company valuation. And frankly, gone are the days where any, say, publicly listed financial institution could only be blindly in the pursuit of profit for their shareholder. How you think about value now is multidimensional, has to be multidimensional. And so understanding that context is incredibly important before you start making any kind of not only digital investments, but business transformation. Because I think the key thing in any transformation is not the transformation itself, but what is the outcome you're transforming towards? Often we found that that's the issue that companies hadn't really solved. They didn't have clarity. They were spending money on all these technology programs, so-called digital transformation efforts, but didn't have clarity on what's the outcome we're transforming towards, and understanding this transformation of context, understanding therefore you need to create value in a distinctive way and in a new way. And if you bring all of that together, I think what we concluded on is that the way to differentiate, the way to win in the so-called digital age, or however you want to characterize the age, but the way to win requires fundamentally creating scaling capabilities versus scaling captive assets. So the old model where you could dominate a market, become a monopoly, roll up a whole bunch of assets, and then that's what you use to shape your future and differentiate, that model is increasingly dead. And instead, organizations have to focus on a set of core capabilities that they really build strength and scale in, that allows them to be durable and really create value regardless of the disruption that's happening around them. Now, I know that may sound a little theoretical. I bring that alive now with a few examples. So let me jump right into the heart of matter and share with you the insights then from the Beyond Digital Thinking. So could we go please 2 pages ahead? And what I will share with you then are the 7 leadership imperatives that we distilled from the study, this 3.5-year study, and all the interviews and all the discussions and so forth, and that led to 7 leadership imperatives that allow you to create value in a new way and literally shape your own future. I think that's very important. This is about shaping your future versus, having it being done to you and trying to play a Me Too catch-up game to what somebody else is doing and disrupting in the market, but how do you direct and shape your own future? And so, look, the first 3 of these leadership imperatives, it starts off with, this is really about how do you shape your strategy? How do you think about what's happening in the external world and shape yourself towards that? And what that requires is, number one, as we say, reimagine your company's place in the world. So rather than chasing after technology and spending lots of money on all kinds of digital programs and, going from the one thing to the next, yesterday it was, we had to do something on cloud, then it's cybersecurity, now it's the metaverse, jumping from one technology to another. Take a step back first and really have to be able to answer 2 fundamental questions. One, what's the real problem we're here to solve? What is the problem we need to solve for our customers and for society? And 2, how do we do that in a unique way? How do we do that in a unique and differentiated way? That is incredibly important to be able to step back and really answer that question. And this is where understanding that the way you have to create value is multidimensional is very important, because that value creation is no longer just about pure profit, but of course around sustainability, around equity, around trust. All those things actually impact your financial valuation. So that becomes the foundation on the basis of which you can then start to direct your investments and transformation agenda. The second is, as you step back and you look at the problems you're here to solve for your customers and society, you very quickly realize you cannot do that on your own. And it's a fool's errand to attempt to do so. And that means you need to embrace ecosystems and how you create value through working with ecosystems. By ecosystems, by the way, I don't just mean platform businesses like Amazon or Alibaba or something like that. but I mean literally, how do you work together and collaborate together with others to create that value for others? And what we learned from leading companies that have really found a way to succeed, including companies, by the way, like Microsoft, who you might think is a giant, but actually a massive amount of value they create is how they engage with their ecosystems, and they pay attention to the success of the ecosystem, not just how much success they're getting. So they don't just measure how much value do we get, how much more sales do we get because we're working with some ecosystem partners, but also how do our ecosystem partners benefit, and how do we make sure that the value that is contributed to the ecosystem from our participation is greater than what we would achieve by ourselves. And I'll bring this alive, I promise, in just a moment with a real example. Then the third sort of critical thing into this, as you work together with ecosystems, the only way to really secure your own differentiation, that unique value, is through building a system of privileged insights with your customers. Now, privileged insights are different from market research or buying data from Google or Amazon or Meta or anybody else, right? Because everybody else can do that. So it's not about market research or focus groups and so forth, but it's really about how do you get unique insights from your customers, from your day-to-day interactions with them, and then how do you wire that into how you operate on a day-to-day basis? And as you do that, that is what fuels your ability to make sure that you remain differentiated, and that what you're bringing, that unique capability or set of capabilities that you bring, remains unique and remains differentiated, and allows you to still have a secure place also in the ecosystems that you're working in. So these three fundamental leadership imperatives sort of are what shape, if you will, the thinking about external strategy. Now I'll come back to the other, the remaining leadership imperatives, but let me actually give you a real example. If you don't mind going 2 slides forward, I want to talk about one of the companies that I think is a great example, and that is Komatsu. Komatsu, for those of you who may be familiar, it's a Japanese company. They largely are in the business of making equipment for the construction industry. Now, like many other companies in the space, so whether you look at Caterpillar or Kubota or John Deere or anybody else, right? Bobcat, which is owned by the Doosan Group, in their digitization journey, one of the things, or so-called digital transformation, one of the things that they did was, for a long time, they had put in sensors and IoT sensors in their various pieces of equipment, and they were collecting a lot of data around the performance of those machines so that they could improve maintenance and machine uptime and so on and so forth. So they spent a lot of money on that sort of digitization. The big problem, as you can well imagine, is, well, so what is everybody else? So there's nothing that differentiated. And what they then found is that the only way to differentiate was to spend massive amounts of capital expenditure on continuing innovation, R&D, et cetera. Very, very difficult to grind it out that way, very hard to get a real return on investment and fundamentally compete and differentiate. And so in their journey, one of the first things they said, well, look, if we want to think about digitally transforming what's traditionally known to be a kind of blue collar, dirty business that's very engineering, manufacturing centric. I think initially they thought, well, maybe digitization, how applicable is it to us or not? Yes, sure, we can do some B2B e-commerce. And they were doing that anyway. And everybody in that industry does. Nothing really differentiated. So what they had to do was to step back, reimagine their place in the world. Part of how they did that was to say, look, well, what's the problem we're here to solve? If we look at what our construction industry customers need, actually, the real problem they have to solve is not about buying our equipment or somebody else's equipment and what's better. The real problem they have is actually how do they get the construction job done on time with high quality, with no safety events, and obviously how do they get the job done with high efficiency, high quality, high output? That's the real issue they need to solve. Now, if that's the problem to solve, what do we bring that's unique? Okay, we have some nice equipment that's unique. But guess what? Most construction sites around the world, you will find equipment from multiple manufacturers. And so the real issue for our customers is how do they actually work together with all of these manufacturers, which then led them to saying, okay, we have to think about how we create value through ecosystems. And that means actually to solve that real customer problem, we may need to start sharing our own data with our competitors. And so step number one, they literally took a very bold step to say, look, we have a whole bunch of machine data. If we want to solve the problem for our customers about machine uptime and making sure the machine is, working correctly, working interoperably with others, that things are scheduled on time for the construction site, we need to start opening up our data to our competitors. And we also invite them to share their data with us. Now, we do that on the foundation of trust. We make sure that we don't abuse the data. We put strict standards around it. We enable this sharing and we open up our platform to others. That one choice then led to a massive new business opportunity for them, where they started to get data from not only other competitors, but other companies in the construction ecosystem, material suppliers, for example, that allowed them then to bring new solutions to their construction industry customers. So now you're no longer just buying the equipment from them, but they can also give you a lot of intelligence about how do you schedule the job, how do you actually perform the job correctly, a lot of other things that are very, very impactful that their customers were willing to pay for, and for new solutions and services. And by the way, very interestingly, during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, when construction sites were shut down all over the world, Komatsu was still generating revenue based on these services and solutions, because construction companies, for example, had to reschedule jobs and so forth. And they had the platform and the insights to help them do that in a proper way, which allowed them to gain, a whole new revenue source. So if you look at now Komatsu's revenue model today, it has shifted from one-time equipment sales and a rental business for equipment to also solutions and services and an annuity-based revenue stream. It's a dramatic new future for them. It's a dramatically different future from them, all through really applying those first three leadership imperatives in a very different way. And you can see that in their so-called digital transformation, it wasn't just about, going after and then sort of Me Too chasing technology, but then really figuring out how do we solve a real problem that our customers have, and then do that in a differentiated way. By the way, of course, they're getting incredible privileged insights from this, because now customers are much more willing also to share certain data that they weren't willing to before. So often you don't want to share data with your suppliers because you're worried that they'll know your margins. They'll be able to negotiate with you. But because of the benefit that construction industry customers are getting, they're now willing to also share more of their own data into this platform. And that's allowing them to have better and better insights, not only to make better machines, but also to create better solutions and different services. So I hope this one example gives you a very real example about how you can really think very differently about shaping your future with the strategy. Now, if we could go back, please, 2 slides to the remaining leadership imperatives. That's all wonderful when you think about strategy. So if you could please go back 2 slides. Go back, please, to the leadership imperative. Thank you. It's all wonderful, to shape strategy in that way. But then the problem is, for most organizations, you're not set up to deliver in that manner. And so that means you also have to fundamentally shift how you operate and how you're set up, which is why we have the 4th leadership imperative, which is around making your organization outcome-oriented. What this means is moving away from the traditional matrix organization that we've had for over 100 years now. And the traditional matrix is some combination of functions and business units. And we've had hundreds of years of functional specialization. The problem is, in a digital era where you need people to collaborate much, much more fluidly, you need them to collaborate across boundaries. You also have to make your organization outcome-oriented, and that means creating outcome-oriented teams at the heart of your organization. This means multifunctional teams that are an established part of your organization. And what I mean by established part is not the type of multifunctional team that's a project team, where you put together people from different functions for 6 months, or, for 30% of somebody's time on a project basis. But for example, like Honeywell does, where people in a multifunctional team are assigned to that organization for 2 to 3 years. And their job is to focus on the outcome of that team. So they have a team, for example, around innovation. They have another one around customer experience. And they may have people in that innovation team, say, from the finance function. Your job, once you're assigned to the innovation team is to focus on the job of innovation, not to represent the finance function. Your next role after 2 to 3 years in that innovation team might be in customer service or might even be in marketing. It's not back in the finance function. Why? It's so that you don't show up there thinking, well, I have to get a promotion from my finance boss. So for 3 years, I'll just do their bidding because I need to kiss up to them in order to get the next promotion. So it's really making the organization work multifunctionally and how you set it up, how you engineer the DNA of the organization to work so that you can be very, very focused on how do you get your people to respond very quickly to market needs and innovate and work in fundamentally different ways. I was just in a forum yesterday, by the way, in Belgium, where companies were talking about their journey towards B2B e-commerce and the struggles they're having with B2B e-commerce. And the number one struggle that they have is getting their people in their organization to work together, because you need to think in a different way. You need to move at different speed. And unless you change the structure of the organization, very hard to do this. Now, if you change the structure of the organization, you also need to shift how you lead as a leadership team. And as we say here, invert the focus of your leadership team. What this means is typically most leadership teams, we've all been taught to lead top down. And if you look at the agenda of most leadership teams, you see a large portion of a leader's agenda is dominated by addressing the issues of today. Leaders, particularly today, are under incredible amounts of stress. And you have to really, it's so nice to talk about transformation, but then when you have to deliver the quarter, that's where your attention goes. So it's incredibly important, as for example, Satya Nadella has done at Microsoft. Equally as important as addressing the strategy is how you address the focus of your leadership team. This means creating time for the leadership team to spend on transformation. You have to be deliberate about this. Make time in your agenda to work as a leadership team on transformation. It also probably means shifting the composition of the leadership team. You will need some different skill sets and roles, probably roles that you don't have. So you see the proliferation, for example, of titles like Chief Digital Officer or Chief Data Officer, Chief Sustainability Officer, very, very important. Bringing different titles and roles into the team. And I don't mean just the top team, but also your mid-management level teams, and really shifting the composition of those teams so that you can get teams to work together in a much more effective way and driving the transformation ahead. And I can talk a bit more about this. Last but not least, in this organizational effort is every one of us has to reinvent the social contract with our people. Now here, this means not just sloganeering about having a good purpose as an organization and caring about your people and doing that because, you feel compelled that you have to do it or it's the right thing to do, but genuinely recognizing that if you want your organization to move at digital speed, if you want your people to collaborate, if you want your people to really care about the customer and build differentiating capabilities and differentiating value, that means that we actually have to connect the organization's purpose with people's individual purpose. And I think we're all seeing this in a very big way, by the way, during the pandemic. We see so many people who've been voting with their feet, right? Leaving organizations because they feel disconnected from the purpose of the organization. They want to go do something else with their careers. So this is incredibly important to address. How do you actually get your people engaged in what your company is up to? How do you invest in their upskilling and development? If you look at all of us are chasing after the same data science talent, and there's not enough of it in the world. We cannot rely on the public education system to fill that need. It will require all of us to actually invest in and develop people so that you can actually build the talent you need to also deliver this digital future. So it's important that you actually work this assiduously into your agenda. Last but not least is disrupting your own leadership approach. And this means addressing and frankly developing yourself as a leader. If you look at the agenda that I've talked about, rethinking how your company creates value, working with ecosystems, breaking up and shifting how your organization operates, leading in a different way. It's a big agenda. And often leaders get asked what they're doing for the organization. They seldom get asked what they're doing for themselves. And what we discovered in the research that we had very clearly shows for you to succeed in the digital era, for your organization to succeed, you have to also make important your own development as a leader. So companies like Philips, for example, make it important and give time for their leaders to develop themselves. Part of the leader's appraisal is, what have you done to develop yourself and to grow? And by the way, this isn't just, taking some executive course with Harvard or Wharton or whatever, and going off and doing that. But it could also be, developing, for example, your listening skills or your work-life balance skills. And in fact, we have some data that shows what are the skills that you need in a leadership team. And if you go to slide 28, I believe we actually can show you some of the data. And what you see is that what's important, if we can move forward, please, to slide 28. What you see is that what's really important in leadership teams of today, just one slide back, please, is not just, for example, being the hero leader who stands in front of the room and can rally the troops, but also having a great degree of humility, being willing to listen and recognize when you don't have the answers. Maybe there's somebody a lot younger or more junior in your organization who actually has the ideas, and you need to step back and learn to lead from the back of the room and empower others to step forward. Or one of the number one things that came out is that to succeed today, you can't just be good at strategy, you equally have to be good at execution as an individual leader. And a number of other traits that we lay out as that are almost paradoxical to one another. So you can't develop these traits unless you actually do some work on yourself. And that is why we say, look, that 7th leadership imperative is incredibly important to address as part of your success formula for really transforming and succeeding in today's age. Now, if we go to the last slide, the last message I want to leave you with, and by the way, I skipped a whole bunch of examples. We will share this document with you so you can look at the examples. And of course, if you have more questions, feel free to reach out. But the last thing I want to leave you with is, if you look at this agenda of these 7 leadership imperatives, reimagining your place in the world, all the way through making your organization outcome-oriented, disrupting your own leadership approach, reinventing the social contract with your people, it's important to recognize that these 7 leadership imperatives need to work together as a coherent system. So you might look at these, and often when you look at a list of anything, right, the human tendency is to say, well, I'm doing number 1, but maybe I'm not doing number 3 as well. Or, yeah, okay, this all makes sense, but maybe I need to do something a bit more on ecosystems. And the warning I would give you is to recognize that it's not about whether you're doing each of these 7 things in different ways, but are you doing them coherently? Are they clearly connected? Are they all clearly connected towards your reimagined place in the world? And are you really working this together in an impactful way? I think that is something important to address. Secondly, it's a tall agenda. All of the companies we studied, it took them between 5 to 7 years to really transform and for example, Komatsu, it took them, some experiments and some failures along the way, right, with this model to really get it right. Now, of course, now they've got it right and it goes very well for them. So recognize that this takes some time. And that means you also need to grant amnesty for the past. I think very important. Sometimes there's a great sort of desire to say, look, how's the digital investment going to pay off? And I need an in-year payback. And I've spent a whole bunch of money and now I need to hold somebody accountable. And you may need to just take a step back, grant amnesty for the past. The choices that were made in the past were probably made, with the best intentions in mind. But if you really want to shape the future, you may need to perhaps rethink a few things and address the future in a differentiated way. What I can tell you, though, with absolute confidence, and the 12 organizations that we profiled, plus the many more that we spend time with, what I can give you the confidence about, though, is that by applying these 7 leadership imperatives, you absolutely can succeed. You can absolutely succeed, not only with the digital transformation or transformation of your organization, but you can, more importantly, succeed in creating lasting value, and you can succeed in creating a very strong organization that is able to absorb any disruption that's happening around you, whether it's the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's a supply chain disruption, whether it's war in some part of the world. You can create an organization that's able to deal with those disruptions and still find a way to deliver value to customers on a day-to-day basis by building this kind of system. So let me pause there. I hope that gives you, some things to go on. And of course, I'm very glad to speak a bit more about some of the examples as well. But I'll pause here and hand it back to you, Shagun, perhaps to see if there's any questions or comments or feedback as well. I think you're on mute because we don't hear you.
Thank you so much, Matt. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, we hear you now.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing the context of your study and the basis for your book and some of the findings you able to articulate, after studying those 12 organizations. Thank you very much. There are a couple of important points you raised around our organization should position to face the external world. And secondly, our organization can create, fundamental competitive advantage that can enable them to thrive in a world beyond digital. Thank you so much. I think without much ado, I need to move quickly to the panel conversation in a manner that we can bring all this conversation to the context of West Africa, and hear from practitioners and operators within the industries, practical lessons using this concept. So I will move quickly to introduce our panelists. The first panelist I will introduce is Abubakar Suleiman. Is the CEO of Sterling Bank. Abu, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I also have on the panel Femi Lawal. Femi Lawal is the head of digital transformation of NLNG. Femi, it's good to have you on the call.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shagun.
Yeah, I think to also join, I don't know if Vish is already on the call. Vish is the head of advisory for PwC for West Africa. If he's not on the call, he will join us shortly, as we proceed in the panel. And Matt will also be with us on the panel. So I think let me start the panel conversation this way. And Abu, I'm going to start from you. We've heard the sort of concept, right, that Matt has sort of highlighted from the research that has been conducted to the global organization. And we also did a quick survey to understand, if you look at the 7 principles, right, to understand where we are within the West African context. It's still an ongoing survey. And what we did is to survey, and we share the link with everyone, and you can still complete the survey if you have the time. And when we did the survey to assess organizations in West Africa, we realized that on the journey of transformation maturity, adopting the principle of beyond digital, and we have quite a few organizations in what we call RUN, and these are organizations that, so to speak, already making progress to transition beyond digital, 50%. And if you look at that 50% a bit deep, you realize that over 60% of that number are in financial services, right? And we had one organization who is supposed to be doing well, very well, which is in the fly stage. We have a lot more organizations still in the working stage, which means they're in the early stage of their beyond digital transformation. I'll move on quickly and sort of ask the question. Abu, you've heard the point that Matt has raised. What is your beyond digital story within the context of Sterling Bank?
Shagun, thank you very much. And thanks for the opportunity to hear this directly from you. When I first saw the book and I saw the title Beyond Digital, there was a part of me that resisted the title. And it's because I was aware of the challenges we were facing with digital in Nigeria. Our own internal estimates suggest that financial services is one of the most digitized and that they have not done 60% of the critical digitization required. And when you move further down, you see the media at maybe 40%, and maybe you see education at 20%, healthcare is even worse. And at the bottom of that, you see the energy sector and the level of digitization is almost non-existent. So you start to think, are we really beyond digital? But I understand that because as I read the book, I didn't realize that I would have titled the book differently if I would have been before and beyond digital, because everything that I encountered in the book tells me a story that I actually need to have read this book before the digitization journey. Then it would have been a more purposeful digitization as I try to achieve genuine capabilities and also focus more on customer insight, which is something we are now learning after going a little bit into digitization. And again, just for the context of Africa, there is a challenge we face with digitization, which is the fact that we had not successfully industrialized. In the same way, we face the challenge with industrialization because we are not educated as society. So there is a major limit to digitization here, which then, effectively brings us back to the idea of we should really begin to think beyond digitization, even to achieve digitization itself. Back to the Sterling Bank story, and I think it's the only place where I can speak comfortably. It's hard to tell a story when the market has not yet put a stamp on approval on your outcome. So it's something that requires you to give internal insight. But something that is clear to us was this imperative, the 7 imperatives that we identified, in a sense, actually fit into what we had done. We had a tripod of commitment when we started. And at the top of the tripod, we had agility, which covers things like the contract, the new contract with the people, right? Contract with your people. It covers things like the inverting the focus of leadership internally. And so our starting point was almost internal, right? And even the big dream, the reimagine the place of your company in the universe. For us, that was something we did by specializing. We realized that the only way we could have the big place in the universe was to focus on things that we could do better than everyone else. And so even though we're a bank, we picked 5 sectors that we have christened the hard sectors. And it is healthcare, education, agriculture, renewable energy, and transport. And we spent years investing in those sectors, investing in working with the industry leaders, doing advocacy and all the pre-work before you then start to do financial services. And of course, the tripod was made up of agility, specialization, and digitization. And coincidentally, digitization was the third leg, not the first or the second. And it's worked out quite well for us. A bit of a comment on when it came to reimagining the future, the conflict between the different stakeholders, specifically between shareholders and management. Sometimes it is the reverse of what Matt has highlighted in the book, where the executives themselves are actually more committed to a longer journey, a purpose journey, than shareholders who are effectively, if you're a listed company, and they are driven primarily by the market returns. So you could have a situation where, in fact, instead of executives battling for short-term commitment, it is the shareholders that are actually battling for short-term commitment. And the final comment on this for me is that it is genuinely a long journey. And in many cases, we have not attempted to talk about the sacrifices that you have to commit to, or the cost of going beyond digital. And that cost can come in the form of sacrificing some level of short-term performance. And it's something that is very difficult to sell. It also comes in the form of disrupting your own businesses, especially the businesses that may be performing. So for instance, in the local financial services, institutional and corporate banking, to a large extent, were the source of revenue. And that included, for instance, the trade export market, an import market, or the trade market, the treasury markets. All of these were critical components of revenue. And most people could not walk away from that. And it's still a challenge today. So yes, this is a book that I would recommend for anyone. I have not had the opportunity of reading the entire book, but every page that I have read, I've read it at least twice. And I think that is the hallmark of a great book. It's just a sense that you can't walk away from connecting it back to what you're doing or what you ought to be doing. I think I will stop here, given that I don't know how much time we have. I can continue later if I get a chance.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abu. I think you highlighted one critical point, which is the point around sacrifice you need for the entire journey. Thank you very much for all the points you articulated. Let me move quickly, be away from financial services to talk about oil and gas. And I would like Femi to react. We know there's significant investment in digitization, implementation of digital twins, and several other initiatives within the oil and gas, right? From the perspective of NLNG, right? Femi, what's your Beyond Digital story?
So thanks, Segun. Confirm you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, so great. And thanks for having me in the session. And thanks, Matt, for a great presentation and what is a great book. I think just listening to Matt speak, a lot of, I won't call it affirmation, but also a lot of reflection. So all the things you talk about, is something I can relate to on the journey we've been on, but also some confirming what we have thought, but some are also like Bob moments saying, hey, why didn't we think about that? And if we had known this a couple of years ago, maybe we would have done things a bit differently. But back to the question. So I think for us, Nigeria LNG, by design or build, for the plant was built, I would say, digitally ready in the sense that instrumentation is there. It's a well-automated plant, and people don't realize our vision is to be a globally competitive LNG company helping to build a better Nigeria. The first part of that is being globally competitive, and the core of our global competition is in our assets and in our performance and production from our plant. What that means is that we compete with the best companies in the world in terms of our production facilities and what we produce. And we've done that. There's a lot of efforts that we've put over the years, right from the inception 20 plus years ago, around things like production optimization, building, really sophisticated technology to give us that edge. And that's some of the things that has made us successful over the years. But what we realized about, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, as we were competing, was that we were finding to keep that top quartile performance, it was taking a lot of, call it sweat and tears for lack of a better word. And we then thought, how are we going to compete and stay competitive? What other levers could we pull? And then the question of digital came into play. And I was in the team that was set up at the time to go and explore and answer a few questions. What does this even mean? There's a lot of hype around what digital is, but more importantly, what does that digital mean to a company like us in the LNG industry? It was interesting when Abubakar was speaking, and also I can confirm we had a study done by McKinsey a couple of weeks ago. If you look at the penetration of digital in industries, the oil and gas industry was second from the bottom. And we realized that, and also with the fact that about 80% of digital transformation journeys fail. And so we then asked ourselves, what are we going to do to have a different outcome? And we quickly realized we're not going to look at our peers. We really need to then look at other industries and kind of broaden our ecosystem in approach. And that's the journey that we've been on. Now, I think one of the things that we've learned over the years is you need to be able, I can't remember what the word was that Matt said, but it's almost like amnesty for the past. That's what it sounds in my mind, because you make lots of mistakes. But it's failing fast and learning and moving forward. And we've been on that journey. And there's many stories to tell around our journey, but it's a journey where we've seen significant progress and some impact. I think to the specific question that Segun was asking about the digital twin, about 3 years ago, we decided that we were going to make a digital twin of our plant. One of the first in the industry. I don't know if any other industry in Nigeria has it, but we do have it. And what is a digital twin? It's a digital replica of a physical asset. In our own instance, it's our plant. So we have a 3D model of our plant, and we've associated to that the associated key information that helps to support decision-making, whether it's around production, whether it's about asset integrity, whether it's about whatever is important in managing that asset efficiently. But then there is a time dimension to a digital twin, because a digital twin should be able to then give you 3 things. It should tell you what's happened in the past so that you can look back and learn. It should tell you what's happening now to aid decision-making and provide insights. But most importantly, it should be able to help you look into the future. And then be able to, do scenario planning and kind of look ahead. If you think about what happens in Formula One, pit stops and all that. That's a critical aspect and a game changer. And to do that is then when you bring in all the advanced technologies, analytics, and AI and all of that. And we do have all of that in play. Now, we don't have it to where we want it to be, but we have enough that we've started our journey. So in terms of, wrapping it up and going back again, I don't know how much time I have because I can go on and on the topic is. For us, it's a journey that we've been on. It's a journey that we are on. Really relate with the advice and the comments from the book, the 7 areas of focus. You need to ask yourself, what are you trying to do? Are you going to, are you going to digitize? And you need to do that, taking your analog stuff and making it digital. Are you going to digitalize where you look at your processes and improve them? Or are you going to do a digital transformation? Right from the beginning, we said digital transformation. And once you go over to digital transformation, it's not only about the processes, it then goes to the people, it then goes to the culture, and then it becomes very different. But it's important that you do that because, I think the first question Matt had said was, people do this and you spend a lot of time and effort and you ask yourself, what has changed? And then we take what we call a 3 horizon approach, right? But then the outcome is, how do I define my digital transformation journey in terms of outcomes? Am I going to do a evolution of what I have? So, do a small incremental change, or am I going to do a revolution where I take things to boundaries and regions unknown? And we are doing a transformation, which is a revolution to regions unknown. But then the first question we asked ourselves is, what is that vision? What is that future? Where are we going? We call it the point C. And we've been working with the PwC colleagues on that. Because with the knowledge of where you're going, you can then start to plot the pathway to that. And in doing that, it's been eye-opening. We're not there, but at least we have clarity around where we're going. And we will define it, we will review it, we will change. There's a lot of forces externally coming to play. We are affected by the energy transition. It is real, and it will change the landscape, not only for Nigeria LNG, but for Nigeria as a country. And we need to be at the forefront of that. We've never been followers. We've always been pace setters and leaders. And even in digital transformation, we are doing the same. So I think I'll stop at that, Segun, and hand it back to you.
Thank you very much, Femi, for the thought you've shared. I like the fact that you also record Matt's point, the need to forgive the future and the past so that we can have a view as we move into the future. Matt, I'm going to call on you now. We've had some practical view from West African context. I like Abu talked about the level of education, how that industrialization, how that impact the adoption of digital within this environment, and a couple of other factors that have to do with multiple stakeholders. The external pressure, that Femi also mentioned. If you were to take this 2 points as an additional case study to the 12 entities you study, what would be your reflection and what would be your comment to the point that have been made?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me thank Abu and Femi. I promise I didn't bribe them before this call to say anything good about the book. So I appreciate your graciousness and kindness. Just when Abu mentioned that comment, it reminds me also of, by the way, there's the study about Titan, which is a large consumer goods company in India that's included in the book. And this is exactly why it is so important to not get enamored with digital and technology. And as we say, think beyond digital, take a step back and look at, okay, well, how do we actually really solve this problem? Because to your point around, if you don't have a skill base, for example, that, knows how to use digital technologies, then you may, frankly, what works in New York City may not work, right, in your local context. And then you may need to actually think of a very, very different way to innovate. And what I have found actually is in markets like Indonesia or India or whatever, Femi, you mentioned the digital twin of your factory. I just recently met a company that's in engineering construction business, and they, do big projects and so forth. And similarly, they're located in India and in Southeast Asia. They have a largely non-digital frontline workforce. And so the way they've applied, for example, digital transformation is to help upskill their workforce, simple videos to teach their people how to operate, using a digital twin and AR and VR to teach people actually how do you perform the job with proper security and safety standards. And that, application of digitization has helped them compete against much more sophisticated, if you will, Western competitors, as one example. So I do think, this is why it's so crucial to step back and think, more about the outcome than about what technology you're going to use. And then based on that outcome, I think you absolutely, can find the right solution. I don't think that succeeding with digital, by the way, just to be very clear, requires that you have a highly sophisticated, digitally trained workforce. Quite the contrary, we see, quite a lot of evidence where that's not really necessary. It's more important that you're thoughtful about how you use technology in the context of the type of workforce you have. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt. I think those are very good reflections. Let me move quickly, right? I'm Vish, you're on the call. And as I sort of talk about that the economic environment is changing, the entire, West African business environment is also getting tougher and also dynamic, things are evolving, right? As you think about this beyond digital, right? What do you think are the capabilities businesses should be focusing on, right? As a transition to a beyond digital or adopt the beyond digital principles. Maybe I should just move back to Femi and to ask the same question, right? As you look into the future, and we talked about all these constraints and all this development, what are the capabilities that your organization is focusing on building to make it future ready, as we transition even in a post-COVID world?
So thanks. I think I will slice it in two and focus on one. So I think the two biggest areas that we look at for the future is one around what's happening in ESG and particularly the energy transition. So we are building and understanding that space because that's going to shape the future not only of our business, but likely, like I said before, our nation, because we are a country very dependent on hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, but then of course digital as well. Now, to kind of zero in on the digital space, the approach we take is we have a strategy for building capabilities, and we put it on 3 levels. So we call it the Build, Borrow, Buy.
Yes. Good morning, Segun. Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I had some.
Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, I can. I'll come back to you in a bit. I'll come back to you in a bit.
My line is.
Please, Femi, continue. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. So I was talking about our Build, Borrow, Buy strategies. So build is, internal capability, building that in-house because of, the uniqueness of Nigeria as a country, but also we have a remote side. Getting that support is not as easily accessible as other clients. And so we find that we have to keep an internal skill set for certain areas. And we define that around the core and the strategic areas that we want to grow in. But then we have a strategy of borrow, so we can buy in skills that we need. And then, of course, we can buy in technology and skills to support in the areas that are non-core or non-niche. Now, in the specifics of what are the areas, the approach we have, and if I focus on build now, is we have what we call a center of excellence, where we domicile the core technical kind of higher level skill sets. But then we have a citizen ecosystem as well. And this is really tied to one of our strategy pillars, which we call the Power of All. We quickly realized that if we want to go digitally and transform in a way that is, transformative. We cannot rely on a core of a small group. Our digital team is quite small. It would be slow, and it wouldn't give you that transformation effect in terms of culture as well. And so we've said, everyone in the organization, we would upskill digitally and at different levels and at different paces as well. And to drive that, we've defined what we call the personas for digital. And those personas are in things like, coding and software development. We've got personas around analytics and AI. We've got personas around things like robotics, around user interface, UI, UX. We've got leadership, leading in digital. We've got personas around things like business development, so identifying digital opportunities and being able to mature them using Agile as a process. So those are some of the skill sets that we have identified, and we are growing, and our strategy is really built around that model.
Thank you, Femi, for that, for those points. I'll ask same questions to you, Abu. As you look at the future, what are the competencies that you think is required and your organization is building to differentiate it, in this new world that we're transitioning to?
Thank you. I guess even though the question is focused on competencies, I think that there's some foundational thing we had to do, which is sort of creating the workplace where you can actually attract talent. I think we often forget that. We assume that to be a given, especially if you're in financial services. The kinds of people that were interested in banking in the past were not the sort of people that would lead this sort of transformation we were looking for. So the first thing we've done is to rethink the workplace. And well ahead of COVID, we had a workplace that had considered things like remote work, flexible work hours, and even started a pilot phase of 4-day work week before COVID. That was fundamental. Without that, we could not have attracted the sort of talent that we needed for the journey. The second thing that needed to happen was we were such a complex organization because of the ambition we had set for ourselves, or we had become a complex organization. We were interested in things in sectors that were not natural to banking. And therefore, again, we had to learn to work in a sense as a sort of a union of many ideas. So we've got a lot of independent ideas that somehow we bring together through the bank. And so that was really important, just being able to work in small teams, small group, face specific projects. But at the heart of it, if you ask me the single most important capability, it is this ability to do partnership. It's something that is often underestimated. We assume it's just a natural thing, this idea of the shared prosperity kind of rather than a zero-sum game. So we've also built our execution around 3 pillars. The most obvious one, obviously, is financing. So we're very focused on getting financing or capital into the sectors we're interested in. The second part of that pillar was that it has to be technology-led. Again, because we realized that building competitiveness in this space, for instance, still requires a lot of use of technology. And many of the sectors where we are operating had not invested in technology at the pace that we had, or they didn't have the capacity to invest the way we were able to. So we committed to investing in technology for those sectors. But finally, and most importantly, was the partnership game. We needed to find a way to do things together. Sort of to put an example out there that explains this better. When COVID struck, there was a lot of focus on what to do, how to get to the vaccine. We realized that the biggest challenge was how to open the country once COVID came under control. And so we sort of partnered with ministries, the state ministries, federal Ministry of Health. We partnered with partners in the technology, in the health tech space. And we built what became the platform that allowed Nigerians to be able to travel, because the test to travel could be validated and all of that. And this wasn't done with a profit in mind. We understood that the big problem for the health sector at that point was solving this problem that allows the economy to sort of come back. And we did that. And that had then given us an opportunity to now collaborate with all the state health ministries. We have access to them, and we're now building for them. That's the kind of capabilities you need. Can you sit at the table and not focus on what you get financially, and kind of focus on how you solve a real problem, right? That is something that matters. The other capability, and this may not be applicable in other markets, is the ability for senior people, experienced people to work with the new generation of people that are now in the workplace, right? It's not the same way that you manage those who are in their 40s and 50s that those in their 20s have to be managed. And it's a real capability, something that is not we don't take for granted. And one of the ways you have to do that is also understand why they come to work, right? They have to have a purpose. They're not going to come to work and say, "Oh, I want to go do banking and do it very well." That's just not enough. What excites them, however, would be those who are in the, for instance, in any of our health sector, are very focused on a project in the health sector that inspires them, that leads to impact. And obviously that then eventually leads to competitiveness in the space. But primarily they have to have something beyond just working in a bank. So I would say that the leadership capabilities of being able to manage the new workforce is equally critical. Of course, you have to assume the conversation around the leaders themselves transforming, right? Again, those who know Nigerian banking system, the kind of leaders that were here 20 years ago and the way they operated simply will not deliver a transformational outcome. So yes, I think I will drop it there. It's really down to transforming our people. That's been where the capabilities reside. But what we have to do to be future-proof or to actually win in the future is that insight, that sort of, the customer insight that is unique to you, that is not publicly available, that has come from your interaction with the customer rather than some data that you just analyze. That is, for me, the most important thing. I think anyone who controls that effectively becomes the most important person in the ecosystem we're building.
Thank you so much, Abu, for those reflections. Matt, I'm coming back to you. Now that we've heard these 2 points on the two panelists on what they're thinking about the future, right? How will you frame it within the context of 7 principles? And what are other experiences that you've had that I think we need to take into consideration given the organization we've studied, now that you sort of also understand better the peculiarities of the Nigerian context or the West African context?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's very hard for me to add anything better than what Abu and Penny have already said. Although the only attempt I will make is to say, I think my learning, actually listening to both of them, is even more important it is to reinvent the social contract with people, and not just with the people within the 4 walls of your organization, but frankly, with society, and how you engage with society to create value with them. Because I think it's also, Abu, you just said it as well, right? That, look, if you're really interested, say in a business like financial services or even in oil and gas, right? If you're really interested in solving the needs of society and for your customers, then, you of course have to build a relationship where you can understand those unique needs of the customer, that you really can work towards solving those needs. And then, of course, reinvent your relationship, frankly, as well with the people, so that they are willing to share those insights with you uniquely and willing to collaborate with you in creating value in a different way. So I think, frankly, my sort of learning from this discussion is that perhaps there is even an opportunity, I would say, to accelerate the digital transformation journey in the West African context, maybe even leapfrog by engaging consumers in this way. And last quick thing I will say is, in the book we talk about STC Pay and Titan, but STC Pay, very interesting. It's a company in Saudi Arabia who primarily serves the migrant workers in the Middle East. So these are people largely from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, that sort of region of the world, Philippines, who are migrant workers, low in digitization generally. You don't think of them as most highly digitally literate population, nor frankly are they the high net worth individuals that you would want to build a fintech startup around. But by doing exactly what Abu mentioned, which is, really investing in understanding the needs of those consumers and being able to build privileged insights with them, I mean, they have found a model to, enable digital payments for all kinds of transactions and all sorts of needs that population has, and actually created an unbelievable unbelievably high margin, high growth business with that end of the population. So perhaps, it highlights for me even more so that with this, that there is an opportunity, I would say, in the West African context, by thinking more broadly, thinking outside the boundaries of your organization, thinking about how you can engage consumers in a broader way is actually a way to even innovate and create new business models that don't exist in other places in the world.
Thank you very much, Matt, for those reflections. This is my last set of questions. Vish, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Segun. I don't know whether you can hear me.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you very clearly, right? I'll just start with you with this last round of questions. All right.
Okay.
Can you just sort of share your reflection very quickly, even thinking about the context of the Ghanaian market around the Beyond Digital principles? What are the things that you're saying, and how do you sort of envisage the future?
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that question, Segun. And apologies to everybody for the technical difficulties I had, but I have followed the discussion very closely and with great interest. And what I'll say is that in the context of the market here in Ghana, there really is very little difference to what everybody is experiencing in Nigeria and in other parts of the world. So in terms of Beyond Digital, I think it's clear to all business people that digital is basically an enabler, which I think is what everybody on the call has said so far, and that you really need to think about your objectives. What are you trying to achieve, and how you weave digital into that facilitator, leveraging on the processes, the people, the culture change, all those other things that need to come to bear for you to take advantage of opportunities that are out there. So to your question specifically, Segun, here in Ghana, we've also seen things evolve from the days when organizations would throw money at big digital transformation projects and digital solutions without necessarily giving sufficient thought to the end game and the journey. I think the word journey was used quite frequently by quite a few of the panelists here. And the journey and how you guide that journey to achieve success ultimately as far as your business objectives are concerned. So the market here, I think, has also matured very quickly. Organizations do understand that it's actually beyond digital. Yes, digital is important. It gives you an advantage. It gives you a competitive edge if used properly. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is to achieve your business objectives using digital as an enabler. And that's exactly the same thing we're seeing here in Ghana. Let me pause there, Segun, and see whether you heard.
Thanks so much. I heard you very well. Thanks, Vish, for sharing the Ghana's perspective. Finally, I'll ask for your closing remarks. We've discussed the principles. We've discussed what your experience has been as an organization. I'll start with Femi this time, right? What are your thoughts, reaction, and what will be your closing remark to this conversation and the principle we have discussed?
So thanks. I think I'm going to react first to some of the points that Abubakar made around the future of work. I think I don't know what's happening in other industries, but we are also being faced by the Great Resignation. For the first time in our history, post-COVID, people just see work differently, and we all need to kind of recognize and react to that. We also have an issue with time in our organization that we have demographics. We are seeing a changeover of the workforce, and so things around attracting talent, but also knowledge management, knowledge retention, become very critical to us and are top burner for us at the moment. But also related to that as well is the fact that digital transformation actually is a change, and there's change management involved from across the organization. Some of the leaders have been in the organization for a while. I think someone alluded to that, and they have to go on this journey. And you cannot assume that even if they say digital, that they actually believe it and they follow through with it. So you have to kind of deal with the human aspects of the transformation journey. And the new, the future of work and the demands of people to work in organizations now to attract and retain demands flexibility, demands connectivity and collaboration in the way of work. But it's also a reimagining of what the work is. I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, when I was an operator, one of the things you would do is, go through a plant and walk the lines and get familiar with where everything was. And you would do that for 6 months to a year to understand where things were. The new guy you bring in today is not ready to do that. Yeah, where is the app for that? Is the question you would hear. And so with that realization, we need to change, what the work is, but also the way we do the work. And I think that realization drives some of the decisions we make and some of the things that we then start putting into place as we set up ourselves. And there was also some mention around the ecosystem. I think absolutely essential. You cannot go it alone. I described the fact that if we wanted to look, traditionally, when we wanted to do something, we would ask, what is that other competitor doing? What is our peer doing? Our peers are not the standard for us for digital because we are all in the bottom quartile, lower bottom quartile, fourth quartile of digital. So it's really then looking cross-industry, cross quartiles, vertically and seeing what's happening elsewhere. Because supply chain is independent of industry. So, if Amazon can do it, why can't we do that for our supply chain? And maybe we find something else to do for another part of our business. So that cross-application is quite important, but also in execution, because you can't do it all yourself. And, I like the concept around, that shared value. You can't hold all the value. You have to let some value go to create value and build, those relationships. So I think that's really quite important. But ultimately, digital transformation has to start and be about value. It's not boys and toys chasing technology. It's really, what are you trying to do and what does value mean? What does value mean is not always dollars and cents. It could also be around what we call the digital trust. It can be around ESG. It can be around reputation. It depends on your organization. It could even be about giving back, helping to build a better Nigeria for us. One thing that we realize is, so one of the big issues, what's the biggest strength of Nigeria? We've got, lots of young people who have nothing to do. Why don't we join, other like-minded people and push them to technology where they have the skills? Luckily, we've got that skill sets, that brain sets to be able to be innovative and be technology driven and easily adopt. If you get Nigeria becoming a technology hub, then people are engaged and then you can create new revenue streams. So it's really around value and putting value at the center and then building from that to define a greater future. I think I'll stop at that and back to you, Shegun.
Yeah, thank you, Femi. Abu, do you want to give us your concluding remarks?
The first part is to actually thank Matt for a comment he made about how we can actually leapfrog when it comes to digital. I think a lot of people in other parts of the world use digital to optimize what they had accomplished. In our own case, we're actually trying to use digital to accomplish that because it doesn't exist yet. In that sense, we're not going to industrialize and then optimize. Rather, we would actually move directly to building a more optimal system. I particularly like that. And also, Femi did say something about how the supply chain is not specific to any industry. I think it's the same thing with talent. Talent is no longer industry specific. Talent really and genuinely can move across all industries. I think we need to bear that in mind. Moving away from there, and this is to tie back to Beyond Digital, one of the biggest challenges we have faced is the concept of peer comparison, because most analysts and a lot of stakeholders are just used to seeing your value relative to someone else. But therein lies the big problem, right? Because a lot of what you see as the peer performance, there are positional advantages that were built over decades. And therefore, when you're looking back and comparing yourself to that, you're not able to respond to that particular advantage, even though you think you might. Worse than that is that if you are genuinely transformational, if you're actually looking to innovate, there are no peers in innovation. In that space, in the forward-looking where you are exploring, in that exploration phase, you're genuinely alone. And you have to be able to convince stakeholders that it's okay not to have anyone that you're comparing yourself to, right? And finally, there is a gap. There is a significant gap between when you achieve some elements of the imperatives that have been highlighted. So for instance, Sterling Bank has been ranked by Great Place to Work 3 years in a row as the #1 great place to work in the large industry category, even better than the traditional people who would be at the top there, who either pay better, like an NLNG, for instance, or who actually have more, in a way, better learning spaces like a PwC. So we've done that, but we have not necessarily translated that into what the rest of the market is looking for, because there is a gap between when you achieve the people imperative and when you eventually begin to see the outcome. And there has to be a way to recognize people, to sort of highlight this progress. Either you do it yourself by selling the dream, or there have to be independent people who would say, well, if you've got this much going in this various components of the institution, there are values that are not yet monetary. So I think it's important to do that. And the last conversation is to go back to the beginning. How do we determine what it will cost to adopt this strategy, right? How do we get people to understand that there is a cost, get stakeholders to accept that there is a cost to this, but that the cost relative to the potential victory is insignificant, or at least justifiable? I think therein lies the problem, because people then tend to question every item of commitment or every item of investment. And in a sense, when you're going through this journey, what is genuinely investment is classified as expenses. And so your performance is somewhat moderated. You need stakeholders to understand that you cannot do this without in some way diverging temporarily from the peer performance or the average of the industry. And then hopefully you can take off from there and deliver something more significant. And like Femi said, the outcome that you see cannot just be financial. It just cannot. Because again, as a leader who transformed from being someone who was a treasury person and a dealer in the treasury in fixed income and commodities and all of that, to someone who now leads an organization that is almost an R&D organization, I recognize that there is a cost to this transformation and people have to accept that. But the benefit is not always entirely commercial or financial. It's got to be bigger than that.
Thank you very much, Abu, for those concluding remarks. Matt, I'm going to hand over to you to sort of conclude the session with your key messages and what you'd like to leave the over 200 participants with.
Yeah, so there's 3 things I'd like to share. One is that, listening to this reflection, it makes me realize even more why it's so important that the business cases for these digital transformations must be more imaginative. It's just been said, right? You cannot make these business cases based on just an efficiency or automation argument. And in any case, in probably in societies like in West Africa, that's not a good argument to make, because labor is low cost anyhow. So, the payoff isn't there just by simply, say, automating a manual job. Or in other economies where, for example, you have employment commitment. So that's why I think it's so important, as you think beyond digital, have a much more imaginative business case and purpose, not just about efficiency and automation, but about revenue growth, about skill development, around capability development, around building trust in society. By the way, that is something that is, I think, hugely undervalued, but a very, very important value driver for any organization. If you digital use cases that help you build trust with society, with your user base, that certainly creates a stickiness, and there's proof to show that even it certainly drives even your financial valuation. So I would really encourage thinking much more broadly about these business cases, which of course then challenges all of us to be able to measure the outcomes. All right, you can't just make a generic business case and say, well, I think it'll be beneficial, but I can't really tell you how, or I can't measure it. So we have to really push ourselves to, measure those outcomes and drive after that. So that's, I think, the first thing I would like to call out. The second message is that I think it's important as you take on this journey to adopt what's called a beginner's mindset. I think the biggest mistake all of us can make is to approach this from a model of, I know how this industry works. I know how this should work out, I have 30 years of experience, and then because of that, this will work or that won't work. very important to be willing to challenge our thinking, allow others to challenge our thinking. And I think that's really where the innovation can happen. And last but not least, I want to stress this point about leapfrogging. I genuinely believe it is an opportunity because I've seen it. I've seen it, as I mentioned, with stc Pay, I've seen it with Titan, and several others where there is a real way when you apply that beginner's mindset, when you think much more imaginatively, you can actually leapfrog and create new capabilities, frankly, that others will want to copy and emulate. And I think, can be very obviously, but also very, very relevant and beneficial for society as well. So I hope that is also something that you see as an opportunity, that you take on as an opportunity from being digital. Don't just seek to copy, what everybody else is doing in another part of the world.
Thank you so much, Mark, for those reflections. I think for me, there are a couple of things that have came out very strongly in the conversation. One is focusing beyond profit, paying attention to people and capability. And we got that example from both NLNG and Sterling Bank. Customer insights is a secret sauce that we must all try to build as organization. And I like the point around ecosystem, which is critical. We can't all build the capability within our organization. We must continue to partner, and the potential to leapfrog for organizations in West Africa. My dear panelists, thank you so much for your thoughts, your reflections, and your answers. Thank you, Femi. Thank you, Abu. Thank you, Vish. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate all the thoughts that you've shared. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Quickly, to wrap up this session, I'll call on Bolanle to just talk about the vote of thanks, and we'll be closed for the day.
Thank you, Segun, and thank you very much, everyone. And good morning once again to our distinguished guests, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it's been such a wonderful session and very insightful session. And one of the things that, I think a lot of people would have taken away from it about the many things is the fact that digital initiatives need to keep pace with technology innovation. And it's also important that people don't just focus just on technology advancement. That's it, that digital transformation is a lot more than that. And I'm hoping that all the insights that we've received from Matt's presentation with regards to looking at the unique capabilities that companies must build and how they need to have, work with digitally enabled ecosystems to tackle the problems beyond what we see, but looking forward at the platforms they need to create, looking at things around climate change, looking at things around how businesses, can reimagine their future, as well as transform their approaches on how they deal with customers. So, we really, really appreciate it. And, from us as PwC in West Africa, and looking at our staff, as well as looking at what we offer as strategy, and we most sincerely thank you on behalf of all our partners and staff for you being here to listen to us, and we hope that we can support you. And thank you again, once again, to Matt and Paul for the extensive work that you've done in your book, Going Beyond Digital, and the research that you did. And and it's a book that we all find very useful, and I hope a number of you would also reach out to sort of get this book. And as I said earlier on, as PwC, we are here to serve you. It's one of the reasons why I put this session together, to be able to sort of show you where things are going. I mean, this is, when we look at a lot of changes that are happening, we have to keep pace with it, or else we will find ourselves not being able to compete in the real world. And we need to develop that. And it's interesting about some of the comments that we're reading from the commentary and the, from the chat box. People even talking about even something as simple as the banking sector, the fact that a lot of the companies that are being regulated are way advanced than our regulators. But even though we're talking about this, we also need to be better advocates of this. So I thank you all for your enthusiasm and your participation. And we hope that you will reach out to us. And, I also once again want to thank Mr. Abubakar Suleiman, MD CEO Sterling Bank. We appreciate you. Mr. Femi Lawal, of course, of NLNG, our very own Vish Ashiago as well, for this wonderful insights out of the panel session. And, just last note that I want to say is for me to reiterate that our strategy and practice is here to work closely with you to create and deliver essential advantage you need to survive in this changing, fractured, and thriving, in this changing world that we're in. And of course, you can reach out to us on the various platforms that are available as detailed in the next slide. So you can reach out to Segun, you can reach out to any of us. You can also reach out, via our various channels as well. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Bolanle, for the closing remark. Thank you, everyone, once more for joining this workshop. You can always access our Transformation Maturity Profiler by scanning the QR code to assess your level of readiness for a beyond digital world. Thank you, everyone. And at this point, the workshop has come to an end. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you and bye.
Thank you, everyone.